We are joined by Rocco Loiacono, a senior lecturer at Curtin University Law School. He's also a writer and translator with an interest in all things European. Rocco, welcome to Spectator TV.
Good to be with you as always, Alexander.
Rocco, most viewers are aware of the UK council elections that happened last week, particularly because they highlighted a shift from the Christian UK to the rising Islamic UK. But there is a much bigger set of elections on the cards between June 6 and 9, and that is the European elections. Now, are these elections important for Europe, and could their result have wider consequences?
Well, generally, European elections are marked by the lack of interest, but this time around, there's very much interest given what's been transpiring over the last few months in Europe with the farmers' protests, and also this has led to a marked shift to the right of the political spectrum, in that support for parties on the right in the European Parliament has markedly increased. We're seeing this potential for this super grand coalition of traditional centre-right parties and traditional centre-left parties in the European Parliament being blown away by a right of centre, totally right of centre coalition. It's got a lot of people worried. I mean, Gordon Brown in The Guardian last week was very, very worried about that these populists are going to take over Europe and it has to be stopped. So this is garnering a lot more interest than it normally would.
Well, the term of the European Parliament is actually quite long. It's 5 years, and there are 720 MEPs, which is 15 more than we had last time. And even though the European Union likes to bill itself as the heart of democracy, not every country gets the same number of votes or the same influence. Germany has 96 MEPs, France is a long way behind with 81, Spain has 61, Poland 53, and all the way down it goes to Malta, where they've got 6. And when the UK left during Brexit, they actually left behind 73 seats. Now, is this a tug of war between nations who want to double down on woke versus those who are desperate to preserve their culture? Or are the MEPs themselves inside each nation divided on these topics?
A bit of both, actually. You've got even splits among the coalition partners. At the moment, there is very much a dividing line in these right of parties, the European Reformist Party and the Identity and Democracy Party. There's a division along NATO lines. The former wants to support NATO, whereas the Identity and Democracy Party doesn't want to support NATO. And at the heart of these, you've got on one on the ECR, that's Giorgia Meloni's supporting that coalition group, and Marine Le Pen is the Identity and Democracy's figurehead. So there's tension there, and also within these as you say, these countries themselves, you've got parties like that want to double down on woke, countries that want to double down on woke. So you've got the Hungarian, led by Viktor Orban. They're a separate grouping of themselves, so they're unaligned. And then you've got the more traditional centre-right parties in France, and also parties led by Macron, and indeed the European Popular Party, which is the traditional centre-right grouping, which is finding itself being overtaken by these parties on the right. So whatever the result is, I think it's going to be very interesting going forward to see exactly what path lies ahead for Europe.
You know what it sounds like, Rocco? It sounds like a mess. But things are not all well in Europe. The left and all their progressive politics, in particular their open borders and mass migration disaster, has brought crime, religious terror, cultural upset, and many European nations have got a backlash happening within them inside their domestic politics. Now, journalists on the left are penning scare articles warning about the far right in Europe, but given how naturally socialist Europe is generally compared to what we're used to here in Australia, far right is, somewhat akin to the socialist left of Albanese. I mean, even further left than he is. You got Austria, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Portugal, and Sweden. They're all nations that are flagged as, maybe leaning right for a change. Here's a clip explaining some of the frustration.
It isn't Damascus. It's not Baghdad. No, it's Hamburg, Germany, and they are calling for an Islamic caliphate. Over the past decade, Germany's leaders have invited millions of Muslim migrants into the country. Now, cultural tensions are rising, and the issue of migration is at the top of mind for voters.
Immigration works to a certain level. We are at this very special point where it gets critical here.
The Alternative for Germany party, the AFD, has skyrocketed into second place nationwide. The platform of the AFD is centered on preserving German culture and national sovereignty.
Every nation has a right of their own culture, but when we are talking about German culture, they don't give us the right, or they're not willing to give us the space to live our own culture.
Rocco, do you think we're going to see the mass migration politics reflected in these European elections specifically?
It's very likely because, as we've seen in that clip there, it's now front and centre. And this is something that has been constantly kicked as a can that's been kicked down the road since about 2014, 2015, so 10 years on. Very much we're seeing the effects of this open borders policy. I mean, Germany has the second biggest Turkish community outside of Turkey. It's incredible. And even in the mainstream media, this is now starting to get coverage because in France, with Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen's party, with her support now at 30 or 35%, immigration is front and centre of this debate. And Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, who up until recently was very green left and supporting all the net zero and the rainbow agenda, has now come on board and said, oh, look, we're in Europe and we have to decide who comes into Europe. And indeed, she's collaborated with Giorgia Meloni to sign agreements with North African countries to try and halt the flow of illegal immigrants. So this is very much a sore point for Europeans, as we've seen. And we're seeing the elites play catch up, but whether anything will be done practically after the elections remains to be seen. But it definitely is a recurring theme. And just touching on that, with the Alternative for Germany party, I mean, they're polling around 20-25%, and they've got candidates in these European elections as well. And Germans head to the polls in February of next year. So this is going to play out for quite some months yet.
Well, it's not just mass migration that's causing a headache for Europe. They've also got food security and production. Now, what started as irritation from the European Union introducing ridiculous laws, like there was some law they had there about the shape of bananas they could export, which is one of the ones that drove the UK crazy before Brexit. But now that's become very serious with their net zero limitations on food production, which is seeing farmland forcefully taken away from intergenerational family farmers. Now, here is a quick clip about that problem.
And if we're going to have a viable living into the future, it has got to be focused around food production. And to me, it's an acknowledgement of the way agricultural policy has failed us now. That you can put your land into solar panels or wind energy and get better paid for it than producing food, and that is not right.
What do you reckon, Rocco? Do you think net zero is going to be competing there with mass migration as one of the major issues for Europeans?
Oh, very much so, and that's what we've seen with these farmer protests, and that is what has led to this increase in support since the end of last year for these parties on the right. And we saw it with the Dutch elections last year with Geert Wilders, his party getting a significant percentage. Indeed, was the largest party in the parliament. So. This is very much at front and centre, and we've also seen some of the walk back too. I mean, from the European Commission on some of these regulations as a reaction to farmers marching to Brussels and spraying buildings and blockading streets. They're starting to walk some of these regulations back, and indeed, car manufacturers are starting to walk back their commitments to electric vehicles. The European Union currently has regulations in place that it wants to abandon internal combustion engines after 2030. Well, those regulations are slowly starting to be walked back. So this is a fight for the soul of Europe, and it's only just begun. There's a long way to go yet.
Well, you're right about car manufacturing because Germany and France in particular were manufacturing superpowers of Europe. That's where a lot of their wealth came from, or their employment came from. And since they went net zero, their factories have been shutting down, or they've become uncompetitive in a market when they've got China off to the side. And so this idea that they were going to discontinue normal cars and replace them with e-cars, everyone was happy to take the money when the government was making handouts, but now that they have to survive on their own 2 feet, the car manufacturers have gone, hang on a second, actually, we can't do this, and it's causing a huge problem in politics in Europe at the moment. But Europe is in an extremely precarious position right now. They've got an aggressive Russia embroiled in a hot war with Ukraine. Countries that border this conflict are extremely concerned that Russia will try to rebuild the USSR against the wishes of these countries. Could these elections decide the fate of peace in Europe?
Well, the peace may be within Europe, depending on the results of this and what's going to happen in domestic elections next year and the year after. You could see this conflict, these farmers' protests continue, and we're seeing in Ireland now people are taking to the streets against illegal immigration. So while there's definitely concern about a hot war on the eastern side of Europe, I think within Europe itself, there's going to be maybe not a hot war internally, but generally, I think there's going to be a lot of discontent. And the elites, as I say, they're scrambling at the moment to try and negotiate their way around this to hold on to their positions of power. But and as I said, we've seen Ursula von der Leyen try and reinvent herself as a traditional conservative mother of 7 and a proud grandmother. So it's definitely a very interesting time, and it's not over by a long shot. And the support for Russia internally within these European right parties is also a source of conflict. I mean, we've got the Alternative for Germany has been criticised by these other parties, such as Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National, for being too close to Russia. So it's a mess everywhere, and how Europe negotiates its way out of it or finds its way out of it remains to be seen.
Yeah, European politics requires more than a sat-nav device to get through it. I don't think they even know what they believe in Europe half the time. But look, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Thanks, Alexandra.